talking to the government officials and then also talking to the NGOs and writing a report. So Ireland, as you know, signed up in 2019. We've had one visit and one report. So I've put the link there and I'll be sharing these slides with you afterwards. So then what Grevio do each year then is they do a general report of all the countries they've visited that year. So, and because it's Council of Europe, there are a lot more countries than are in the EU itself. So in 2023, Grevio did 36 country reports and they've summarized them in one overall, what they call their general report. So they've done this 5 times. And I think is an interesting piece in this report, they've called it the focus section, why risk assessment and risk management are so important to protection and prevention. So that full piece as well is linked there. And I'm going to now do the Lunch and Learn, the 5 books that could save your life. And just to give a content trigger warning, I will be talking about coercive control, sexual violence, sexual abuse, suicide and femicide in this presentation. So Haven Horizons, we are a primary prevention organisation, a national primary prevention organisation, and our focus really is awareness raising, training, research and policy. And we like to try and do that through collaborative partnerships and the synergy of organisations that are working in the same area and how that synergy creates additional energy to continue the work we're doing. And one of those partnerships that we developed was in 2018 with what was then Limerick Institute of Technology, but is now the Technical University of the Shannon Toos. And most people who are on the platform at the moment did the level 6 accredited continuous professional development training that was developed through that partnership. And as part of that partnership, we also got Research Ireland funding. And that funding is what actually started us developing this virtual community of practice. And the third thing that Haven Horizons did, I started to select some books to have reference books for people who were on the level 6, who were interested in finding out more about specific topics. And I donated them to the Toos Library. And then during COVID, when people couldn't get to the Toos Library, but they could access online the National Library Service, we donated all the books to Libraries Ireland and then Libraries Northern Ireland and to Women's Aid Federation Northern Ireland. So when we had that connection then with Northern Ireland, we applied for Shared Island funding. And so these 75 books have been donated to all of the libraries, and you can find out about the books. The full list and the brochure is on the Haven Horizons website. So the reason I mention the brochure is that the brochure will tell you which of the books are ebooks, which of the books are audiobooks, and some of the books are both. And that the Libraries Ireland has an app, a Borrow Box app, if you want to borrow them through the app. And as I say there, our website gives you all that information. So with the 75 books and donating them, we then looked at applying for Shared Island civic funding. And we did that with 2 partners from Northern Ireland, a feminist activist group called Reclaim the Agenda, and the Belfast and Lisburn Women's Aid. So myself, Danielle Roberts, Helen Crickard and Noelle Collins, we are using this partnership to examine the destructive impact of coercive control. And we're doing it through discussing 5 books that could save your life. And Sarah Hart, who's working with Haven Horizons and is an Irish Examiner columnist, is the moderator of the panel discussion. So there are 5 events, and you can see there's one in Ennis, 2 in Belfast, 1 in Dublin at the Arts and Human Rights Festival. We just don't have the exact date of that yet. And then we're going to close with a webinar, and we hope to have most of the authors of the books on the webinar. And so what 5 books? Very difficult choice. The book choice changed over time, but finally we decided on Invisible Chains with Lisa Arizon-Fontes, Operation Lighthouse by Luke and Ryan Hart, Brutally Honest by Melanie Brown, In Control, Dangerous Relationships and How They End in Murder with Jane Mockin-Smith, and What's to Be Done About Violence Against Women with Professors Kate Fitzgibbons and Sandra Walkley. And of course, people would say, well, if you're talking about coercive control, why didn't you select Evan Stark's seminal text? And I was looking for books really that I felt that would be very readable and that anyone could pick up and learn what is it like to personally experience coercive control? What are the red flags? What are the tactics? And then within the family structure, how does domestic sexual gender-based abuse and coercive control impact family dynamics, and why is it so difficult to recognize the invisible chains, and then also to recognize the risk associated with coercively controlling behavior and how it can go from the honeymoon period to homicide in a very short time. And then we chose the book by Kate Fitzgibbon and Sandra Walkley because it looks back over 40 years and then looks forward. So just to say a little bit more detail about each of the books, Dr. Lisa Arizon-Fontes wrote this book. She was working in the area and was working in child psychology and domestic abuse. And she herself, in her second marriage, ended up in a coercively controlling relationship. And it took her quite a while to recognize it and to extract herself from it. So she describes both from I suppose, a professional point of view and a personal point of view, how that pattern of behavior, how insidious it is, and that it's not incidents of physical violence, as we all know, and that over time, the targeted victim of coercive control becomes more and more entrapped by these repeated tactics, the isolation, the micromanagement, the stalking, the threats, sexual coercion. And then, of course, that wouldn't work if it wasn't intermingled with some what you would call loving acts. And then, of course, there may or may not be physical violence, and that sometimes is very confusing. So the whole purpose of coercive control is to create confusion and fear. And those invisible chains, I think that Lisa Arizon-Fontes talks about so clearly. And in her book as well, she talks about how coercive control can happen to anyone. Female victims, male victims, LGBT victims, and why young people, people with disabilities, and professional women are quite vulnerable to experiencing domestic abuse. And what's really useful at the back of this book is coercive control checklists and questionnaires to help people identify whether they or someone they know, or to use with someone you're working with, to help identify if it is coercive control. And Luke and Ryan Hart, the two brothers whose mother and sister were murdered by their father. This is the book they wrote about the devastating impact of coercive control and domestic homicide. And I think most people know their story, but they had never heard of coercive control, even though they had lived with coercive. They were born into a family dynamic of coercive control, and that was their normal. And they didn't have any knowledge or awareness. And the first time they saw or heard the words coercive control was when they were sitting in the police station after their mother and sister were murdered by their father, and he went on to commit suicide at the same time. And really, this is really linking into Jane Mockin-Smith's book about the risk of leaving a coercively controlling relationship without a safety plan. And even leaving one with a safety plan is no guarantee, because the highest risk is during separation, any trigger that sort of challenges a person's control, and that would be talking about a separation, separating, and post-separation. And the media portrayal of domestic abuse and coercive control, and this is what This is what really drove Luke and Ryan Hart to become activists, that the media portrayed this as a crime of passion rather than a lifetime of control. And it wasn't about a loss of control. It was about making sure that if they were going to leave, that they wouldn't do so without their father really punishing everyone in the family. So family terrorism, and that's what Professor Evan Stark, that was how he described it: intimate terrorism, and if there's children, family terrorism, and he said it's hostage taking. And so that's Operation Lighthouse. Melanie Brown, Mel B, very famous. I mean, the Spice Girls were the top pop band in the world at the time. And this book really describes how a famous, financially independent woman with an internationally successful career could be reduced to someone who, as she said, didn't make decisions small or big, completely isolated with no control over any aspect of her life. And that included her emotional life, her mind, her body. Her partner at the time was ensuring that she was taking alcohol and drugs and then filming her. And so her book it's quite a tough read. There's a lot of, as I mentioned, image-based abuse to the point where she attempted suicide. And but even after that, when she realized she'd reached rock bottom, she couldn't leave because it was out there that this was where she was at in her life, and she would not have got custody of her own children that were not belonging to that partner or the child she had with that partner. So she ended up in that relationship for 10 years. And when she left with nothing. He had control of her bank account, her bank cards, every aspect. He was managing her business. And again, she looks back and talks about how she realizes now how it impacted the children. And again, the family terrorism. So Jane Motten Smith's book, In Control, Dangerous Relationships and How They End in Murder, and the big thing that came out of that book, of course, was the domestic homicide timeline, the 8 stages, and as I say, the history, the honeymoon right through to the homicide, and how if you can recognize these sequential, temporal, progressive stages as a frontline practitioner, then you're really identifying the risk and maybe able to work with people to help them identify and the importance, as I say, of a safety plan and having multi-agency involvement. So this book, What's to be Done About Violence Against Women, as I said, Professors Kate Fitzgibbon and Sandra Walkley. Kate Fitzgibbon be very well known in Australia, and Sandra Walkley is in a UK university. And so in 1983, there was a book of the same title by Elizabeth Wilson. And they look back at, she was asking that question 40 years ago. They look back at what's happened since, and they look at what's happening now, and then they look ahead to prevention. And they say that the focus on criminalisation without coordinated policies and prevention responses. And it's a very narrow focus and can actually be quite dangerous for women to be forced down the road of criminalising the perpetrator without all of the other policies and prevention responses in place. And they summarise their understanding by saying that there are 3 key barriers to progress: the rise of neoliberalism, the failure to think otherwise, and that's this holistic response. Even if we talk about our 4 pillars of the Istanbul Convention and the coordinated response. And then again, what we all know, what we're seeing, the persistent power of misogyny. And not just that it's persistent, but it's actually getting worse because technology is now allowing the weaponization of misogyny, whether it's through pornography or, the alt-right, all the right, and the incel groups. Huge problem that is increasing every day. So that's the 5 books. And just to say that next week it's Dr. Niamh Maguire from SETU, and she's going to be looking at the findings of a piece of research that she did called A Study of District Court Judges' Views on Sentencing and the Sentencing of Relationship Violence. So I am just going to say to people as well that this session is open to everyone on the platform, and anyone who wants to is invited to present their work, their research, their practice, anything related to domestic, sexual and gender-based abuse as part of the Lunch and Learn series. So what we do in this half hour, 5-minute introduction about something about the platform or something that we've put up on the platform, and then introducing the speaker. You do an input for 12 or 15 minutes, question and answers, discussion, and then just finish up with anything that anybody wants to say. And so if you're interested, Sharon is the person who's organizing the timetable for the Lunch and Learn, and that's Sharon's email. So before I open it up to questions and answers, I'm just wondering if people would put into the chat if they're receiving notifications about the community of practice. I mean, are you using your phone? Have you got the app on your phone? Are you using your laptop or your personal computer? Have you allowed, or maybe not allowed, which is fine as well, the notifications? Would you like to receive them and you're not receiving them? And are you receiving emails about the VCOP activity? So I'll just give people a few minutes to put that into the chat, how they're finding, are they getting updates and from